Thank you for staying with us. This one says rights of older persons, and like I asked Ayo at the beginning of the program, do we have any rights?
Oh yes, you do. You are human beings. So you have human rights.
We face a whole lot of specific challenges when it comes to the enjoyment of human rights. For example, old people face age discrimination, particular forms of social exclusion, economic marginalization due to inadequate pensions, or are more vulnerable to exploitation and abuse, including from family members. Old people are also at risk of serious human rights violations, which are frequent in large institutional settings for long-term care, such as care homes. To talk more about this with us this morning, I'd like to welcome Dr. Philip Oamen, who's a lecturer at the Birmingham City University, United Kingdom. Good morning, Dr. Oamen.
Good morning, Alera. Good morning, Ayo.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
I'm surprised to see that you are such a young person and you're going to be talking to us about the rights of old people.
Yeah, I'm young, but as you just mentioned a while ago, the issues around older persons is something that everybody has to take to heart and take seriously, because someday every one of us, God willing, will become an older person. And there is therefore a need to address it both at the family level and at the institutional level, government level, so that at the end of the day, when we become older persons, there will be no generational crisis. So yeah,
Spot on, Dr. Oamen. So what are the rights of old people? Or should I say older people?
Yeah, thank you for that question. First of all, there is a difference between old people and older persons, because I saw you use both terms. So when we talk about older persons, it has everything to do with ability to live in a positive life, that is at positive age. But when you talk of old person, it comes with some stereotypes. Oh, this person is old, they are only waiting for death to take them and all of that. Oh. Now, whether there are rights of older persons, yes, there are rights. Older persons are entitled to rights that every other person, a child born today, is entitled to. So the issue of rights do not attenuate with age. Human rights are ageless. So what that therefore means is that older persons are entitled to the dignity of their persons. They are entitled to work until they are unable to work, until they decide not to work. So the issue around mandatory retirement age is actually an ageist perspective. It should not arise. People should work until they are able to say they do not want to work. There should be no upper threshold as to when a person should work. Then there is the issue of fairness, both in the criminal justice system and in terms of civil rights. Older persons, because they are a disadvantaged group, should be given some reasonable adjustment so that they will be able to articulate and activate their rights with a view to getting remedies. There are several rights. For example, right to housing, right to social security, which is a fundamental one. Older persons have contributed to the society in their active age. Now that they are older, the government has a responsibility to ensure that their rights are given to them, their pension. The idea of somebody being in the queue and then falling and die because of trying to get pension should not arise. That is abuse. That is neglect. Older persons issues around older persons should be institutionalized in such a way that there will be a seamless way of getting those rights. Another right, okay.
Well, yeah, just a quick one. I wanted to, and there's a lot, to unpack in all that you're saying already, but just so to get more value, tomorrow is the 33rd commemoration of the United Nations International Day of Older Persons, and the focus of the theme is fulfilling the promise of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights for Older Persons across generations. Can you give us an idea of what to expect, or what the whole idea of that declaration is?
Thank you. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights was made after the Second World War. It was made in 1948 to ensure that human rights are universal. So anywhere you are entitled to human rights. The fact that you are a human being automatically activates your rights. But there is a question around whether that is actually the true position of things as it relates to older persons. Have their rights been realized? The answer to that is that, if you ask me, I would say the promises of the Universal Declaration have not been fulfilled in the lives of older persons. And the reason for that is at the global level, as we speak right now, there is no particular convention or treaty that addresses the issue of older persons. They are seen as either men or women, but that shouldn't be. We have convention for children, convention for women, convention for people with disability. And you know that old age is not a disability, strictly speaking. So they cannot rely on the Convention on Disabilities to achieve those rights. So there is a need to give them that traction, a specific focus on by way of a treaty at the international level.
Well, perhaps you want to, my apologies, perhaps you want to give us an idea of why you think that is really, really crucial. I mean, you've also made it known to us that you have done some work on this, that has been cited by the United Nations, at the ongoing, at the UN General Assembly, the 78th session. What are your findings about the specific exclusive concerns of older persons?
Thank you. Why do we have to focus on them? The first thing is the issue around population aging. Population across the globe is aging. In 1980, we had about 260 million older persons across the world. But as of 2021, that jumped to 761. That is it tripled the former one. Then the United Nations has given us a projection that by 2050, older persons will be 1.6 billion people. There is a question around whether we are prepared. How prepared are we in meeting the needs of those persons in terms of putting infrastructure in place? And as I mentioned before, we are not prepared. The population explosion that is about to happen will affect so many persons, both in the developing countries and even in the developed countries. So if there is no mechanism put in place, there will be a disaster. As you mentioned, I recently submitted a paper acknowledged by the United Nations in the ongoing General Assembly section. In that particular submission, I carried out some scoping review of existing literature and laws. And I found out that whenever we are talking about current issues, for example, climate change, the Nigerian Climate Change Act, for example, of 2021, specifically provides that when the issue of mitigation and adaptation are being addressed, care should be taken to take into account how it affects women, children, and youth. That is clearly provided. But there is nothing said concerning older persons. And there is a report by the United Nations and other bodies that in terms of mortality rate, climate change affects older persons more than any other group, any other age group. So if they are the ones mostly affected, why should they not be carried along in terms of participation and in terms of policy making to take account of their human rights?
Just to be clear, Dr. Oamen, what is the age range of these older persons? Because you didn't just say old persons, you're talking about older persons. What's the age range we're looking at here?
According to the United Nations, the older person means a person from 60 years and above. That is the global definition. But as you see, some countries are beginning to go contrary to that, using Nigeria, our country, as an example. Nigeria recently passed the National Senior Citizens Act, National Citizen Center Act of 2021. In section 20 of that particular act, senior citizen was defined as anybody who is 70 and above. That is a clear and radical departure from the United Nations definition. Old age is socially constructed. That is quite all right. But a country as Nigeria cannot on its own contract out of United Nations legal and normative framework. Anybody who is 16 years old should have some rights, whether or not they contribute to the realization of that right. Talking about pension, for example, we have contributory pension in Nigeria. What about those persons who do not work in the formal sector and they are older persons? Are they not entitled to stipend, which is outside any contribution they have made? I think I have to commend the Ekiti State government in this regard. They have actually shown that they are committed to the realization of the rights of older persons. They have a system, a package or a scheme that takes care of older persons, whether or not they have contributed to that particular pension scheme. So to answer your question, age 60 is actually the cutoff age for being an older person.
Okay. Now Doctor, Nigeria, I'm sure, is a signatory to all these UN protocols. How effectively do you think that Nigeria abides by them? And I'm asking this question in light of the fact that oftentimes I have gone to a bank and I have complained because there's no sitting area for people, not even for older people. People over 70, 75 are seen standing, waiting to be served. And the same thing goes for our transportation system, where there are no designated seats, that when an older person gets on the bus, if you're sitting on those seats, you get up for them. Those things don't happen in our society. So how effectively do you think that Nigeria is abiding by the terms of all those protocols for which they have signed?
I think, first of all, I will commend Nigeria in terms of having some legal framework around older persons. Actually, it's one of the few West African countries that has a law, National Senior Citizens Center Act, that talks about older persons. It also has a bill that is pending is waiting for the presidential assent now. We have the Older Persons Privileges, Rights and Privileges Act, which has been passed by both houses of assembly. So those are commendable steps that have been taken. But the question then is, in terms of practical realization, how far have we fared? I would say we still have a long way to go, both at the institutional and personal level. The problem really is that we still believe that older persons should be taken care of by their family members. Yes, that is the African culture, which is okay, but that is complementary, not substitutive of the government duty to provide for older persons. There must be a return reward mechanism put in place by government, like the center we're talking about. I checked the recent budget, both the 2022, 2023 budget. I did not see any specific financial commitment to older persons. Apart from the takeoff grant that was given to them, that takeoff grant is for payment of salaries of persons in the center who are not older persons. So there are some systemic issues that suppress and attenuate the realization of those rights. For example, the issue of employment. You just mentioned banks. Most banks in Nigeria will tell you that if you are 25 years old, you should not, or 30 years, you should not apply for jobs. What if I am 65 years old? I have the capacity. I have the skills to do this work. Is that not ageism? That is ageism. And if you also talk about education, Nigeria, when it talks about education, is more or less focused on education for the younger generation, formal education. Adult education is not taken seriously. That is why we have the issue around digital ageism. You, at the beginning of this program, I know you were talking about smartphones and all of that. Older persons, because they are not digital natives, they are digital immigrants. Digital immigrants must be trained by the government, as it happened in other countries, to be able to live comfortably with the digital natives, so that there will be no digital divide. If there is a digital divide, it will affect the rights of those older persons. So to answer your question, in terms of policy and legal framework, I think I would say Nigeria is ahead of some countries, apart from some other countries like South African government that has an older persons law already in place as far back as 2006. But that is it.
Okay.
There is no...
You know, when you talked about older persons being digital immigrants, I'm wondering whether you're even referring to them as digital nomads, but please don't answer that one. You know, the issues you raise, tend to go in the region of implementation or enforcement of these things. So maybe it's a good way to ask you what the challenges you see what are the challenges that you see surrounding the realization of these rights or the implementation of some of these initiatives that you say the government of Nigeria has already put out?
Thank you. I think the first challenge is lack of data collection and disaggregation around older persons. As I mentioned at the beginning, older persons are grouped as men and women. There is no specificity when it comes to data collection and disaggregation on older persons. The first thing we need to do is to have a desk that is charged with the responsibility of knowing the number of older persons in any given locality. What are their specific needs? So we must know how many, we must know what they need. Then there is also the challenge of Nigeria not signing up to some other instrument, legal instrument, that will be in favor of older persons. I will give you an example of that. At the regional level, at the African Union level, there is a protocol known as the Protocol to the African Charter on the rights on human and people's rights on the rights of older persons. That protocol was adopted in 2016. It requires 15 member states of the AU to come into operation. As we speak now, only 11 countries have actually ratified it, and Nigeria is not one of them. So Nigeria needs to address that issue. Then Nigeria also needs to, in a way, change the narrative at the personal level. We do not need to stereotype older persons. Merely looking at a person because of the way they look, do not just conclude that this person is unable to do this, he is unable to do that. Capacity has nothing to do with age. Of course, I know that there is a relationship between age and physical capacity and all of that. But when it comes to mental ability to do certain things, older persons should not be stereotyped. I think those are some of the challenges. Stereotype, issue around adoption and ratification of regional instruments, and of course, the issue of data collection and disaggregation around older persons.
Is there a place, my apologies, is there a place for culture? Because as you cited earlier, you know, Nigeria, perhaps if I dare say, generally Africans, we tend to have a way of respecting old age, so to speak. That's why a number of people will be wondering, you know, what this whole, you know, conversation is about. Of course, we also know that in recent time, much younger people may not sustain some of these values or cultural values and traditions that we've had over time. But do you think there is a place where culture may have failed older persons in this regard as well, which the law or these conventions could only have come to support if culture was doing its job?
Yeah, I agree with you. Culture has a role to play. But as you also mentioned, culture has been eroded by several things. And one of the things that have actually affected the way and manner culture used to promote the rights of older persons is globalization. Because of globalization and urbanization, there is a disconnect between the older persons and their younger family members who will normally take care of them, who will check up on them to know whether or not there is issue of abuse, whether there is issue of neglect. So if the culture has been eroded, and if people are no longer living in a compact environment, then the government should step in. The government's role is an independent role, independent of what the African culture says as to the rights, the duty of members of a given family to take care of their old persons. The African Charter has actually recognized the role of culture. If you look at the provisions of the African Charter and the protocol I mentioned earlier, those laws have stated that families should take care of their older persons, but it also went further to enumerate the duties of government, and that is my emphasis. There is a need for an institutional approach to aging.
Is it because culture seems to have taken care of that the government is now slacking? And what I mean is that by the time you get to 70 in most advanced countries, you don't pay taxes anymore. In fact, you now become what I would describe as the government's child. The government provides you with your free ticket to ride on the public transport system. The government gives you money to eat. Of course, I also understand that is because you are on record to have paid your taxes all through your working life.
Yes, I agree with you to some extent that, yes, there is, the government can rely on the issue of erosion of culture to say that is why they are laid back. But then, that is just a way of escaping from an existing duty, because whether or not culture says I should take care of my family, you as a government have a duty to take care of those persons, especially against the backdrop that they have contributed in their active age to the system. Yeah. So, as it happened in developed countries, you have just mentioned some of the good things the older persons enjoy here. If you are an older person, you have attendance allowance. If you are sick, you have money that is given to you because of your age. You have heating allowance. So during winter, you do not begin to receive where you get money to heat your home. If you are bereaved, you have bereavement allowance as an older person, which is not given to any other person. There are several concessions. TV, I have to pay for TV license before I can watch my TV, but older persons do not do that. Those are entitlement. Bus pass, if you are an older person, you do not need, you have a free bus pass.
Yeah.
But in Africa, we begin to push it to individual families. After you should take care of, yes, I will take care of my family, but that does not attenuate from the fact that you as a government own those persons a responsibility to take care of them until God calls them.
And they should also get free Medicare, shouldn't they?
Sure.
Because
free Medicare,
as you get older, chances are that you will fall sick more often with one thing or the other.
Exactly. And that takes me to a very important point. Thank you for that. Now, another problem is that the Nigerian healthcare sector is not geared towards a lifelong policy. So there are no geriatric provision. So what that means is that the gerontological equipment and personnel that are solely devoted to the rights of, to the realization of the right to care or right of care, right to health care of older persons are not available. The Punch newspaper, as recent as I think 2021, came up with a damning condemnation, which was that across Nigeria, we have less than 100 geriatricians. In the whole country, we have about 9 million older persons, but we have 100 geriatricians. So doctors that will attend to older persons are just 100. So if you have an older person specific ailment, you stand a chance of going to the other side of the world simply because the government has not provided the needed health facilities.
Okay. Dr. Oamen, that's where we're going to have to leave it for today. Dr. Philip Oamen is a lecturer at the Birmingham City University, United Kingdom. Thank you very much for coming to talk to us about older people's rights. Maybe older people need to come together and actually carry placards in Nigeria. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, Sunrise will be right back, and we shall be looking at the lifestyle segment.
Yes. Don't look at me. We're coming back.
Go ahead. Say it.
We'll be right back. Hope you had your cup of cocoa. We'll be right back.